This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Joining me now is Mervin Jebaraj. He's with the University of Arkansas's Walton College of Business Center for Business and Economic Research, where he is the director and chief economist. Good to have him with us, as always. Mervin, let's talk about your University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. New report out showing that the university's contribution to the state is $2.2 billion. That is greater than the $725 million in economic impact from about 9 years ago, a study you guys did. Tell me what has grown over that time span to reflect this near tripling of growth.
Roby, if you were on campus here at the University of Arkansas, you would see a lot of hammers and a lot of construction equipment. So there's been a tremendous amount of growth between 2009 when we first did this study and 2019 when we released the 2018 numbers, which was $2.2 billion. So when you look at what has grown at the University of Arkansas, is literally every sector that we've measured across the board has shown some significant increase in economic impact to the state of Arkansas, and that's how we got that $2.2 billion. Now, when you run through that, people typically think of the university as a place where people come to get a degree, and so we're human capital development, and that's very much the core of our mission. But more and more, the university is an economic development engine for the rest of the state, which is how you see this $2.2 billion economic impact. And so just the operations of the university account for about $1.5 billion of that economic impact on an annual basis. So that's a recurring impact that supports more than 13,000 jobs in this state. So it's a major economic driver, not just for Northwest Arkansas, but the state as a whole. And that $1.5 billion economic impact has to do with the university's operations, its payroll of more than $400 million, the visitors coming to the university that contribute about $90 million, the students at the University of Arkansas contribute about $450 million, and that does not include tuition at all. That's just how much they're spending in the local economy as a result of being here. And so all of these different sectors, you look at visitors spending about $90 million, roughly half, or close to half of that is about athletic event visitors, and all of these different categories, you're seeing increased amounts of spending, increased amounts of economic impact. And then the university has a lot of different organizations dedicated to, direct economic development in the way that most people would think about. That is, the university promotes entrepreneurship and starts new companies either from alumni or faculty of the university that are starting companies. We have the Research Technology Park on campus here in Fayetteville. That generates an economic impact of about $60 million in a year. And that's just, brand new companies starting up. That's before they leave those premises and become much larger companies with much higher employment in the community. So those are all the recurring economic impacts, about $1.5 billion in a year, and the rest of the $700 or so million is from a construction impact. And so there's, a campus of our size has construction almost every year. The amounts vary on a year-over-year basis, but in 2018 it was about $700 million, and that supports more than 4,000 jobs, or that supported more than 4,000 jobs in the state. So put together, that's 4,000 jobs on a one-time impact from construction, more than 13,000 jobs from the annual recurring impact of about $1.5 billion. That's a lot of dollars, and that's a lot of jobs here in Arkansas.
And if you could just bottle all of that up and export it to China, it would lead us to our next topic, which is that the talks in China between the U.S. and the Chinese are making some progress. According to the president, who himself was in Vietnam meeting with North Korea's leader this past week. We have seen the new Chinese tariffs, according to the president, being withheld for the time being. He claims there is some progress in trade talks between China and the U.S. occurring. Tell me, what do we know, and how do you see this affecting the U.S. economy?
As a short aside, before we start talking about our trade deals with China, the University of Arkansas brings students in from China to study here, and that actually counts as an export from the United States. So having more students, come to universities across the United States actually increases the amount of exports from the U.S. to China, because they're bringing in Chinese cash and spending it on our economy. So that's an entirely separate aside, and one that's a growing sector of our exports is higher education. So But nonetheless, we've had tariffs imposed on Chinese products for a while now. That's about 10%. The big threat was that on March 1st, that would become 25% on a much larger set of products. And I think, the tariffs that are currently in effect have roiled different sectors of our economy. A lot of companies have tried to just eat the price increases from these tariffs, and that's showing on their bottom line. Some companies have tried to pass on some of these costs, and that affects their sales as well. But in general, the markets, companies across the United States and in China were afraid of the 25% tariff that was coming on March 1st. We're glad to see that it's sort of indefinitely postponed while the talks continue. Now, on the subject of the talks, there's very little detail on what exactly is the outline for what we will get from a sort of agreement between China and the United States. I think, the best case scenario that we're expecting in terms of what we would have from talks from these two countries is that we get rid of the tariffs that we imposed. They get rid of the retaliatory tariffs that we imposed, and we go back to the situation that we were in. I think as a part of this, you will see a lot of framing about China buying more agricultural produce from the United States, more soybeans, more cattle, and things like that. I think that's probably more of a framing issue than anything else. Yeah, so China's importing exactly no soybeans from the United States right now. They used to import a lot of soybeans from the United States, including from Arkansas. Quite a few soybeans were going from Arkansas to China. None of that's happening anymore because of the tariffs. I think we'll get to some agreement where they'll agree to buy those soybeans and some natural gas and other energy products and beef from the United States. Will it be more than what we had before? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, but I think it will give both sides enough to say that some compromise is reached and no one's lost face, which is very important, and we'll be able to move forward. And I think that's the best case scenario. An idealistic scenario would be that we would reach some agreement on intellectual property issues between China and the United States. I personally have very low hopes that something to that scale is being negotiated, because I think the two sides are too far apart to reach an agreement this quickly on something like intellectual property. And I also think that if we were to get China to cooperate on some of these intellectual property issues, we would need our allies across Western Europe and Canada and Mexico and all of them to be on the same page with us negotiating with China. But that's not what we're doing right now. We're negotiating unilaterally with China, and so China really doesn't have much of an incentive to negotiate with us and give us what we want from them on intellectual property. But I think what we will take as a victory is that we're not going to a 25% tariff, and that hopefully at the end of March or soon we'll see a rollback of the 10% tariffs, and we'll see a little more opening in the Chinese market for exports from the United States to China. But China's going to want something back from us, and I think they'll ask for some market access. So it'll be interesting to see what those final agreements are, but I think maybe too late for the planting season in Arkansas here, but maybe soybean farmers in the future will have a few more markets for their soybeans here that are grown here in Arkansas than they had in the last year.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that story that we reported this week, China's agreed to buy 10 million metric tons of soybeans from the U.S. as part of this optimistic change here, but that's only about a third of what they normally spent. Let's shift gears and go to Wall Street. We've seen a big bankruptcy filing here in Arkansas this week with publicly traded Windstream, but as you're going through these fourth quarter earnings from a variety of publicly traded companies, the latest quarterly earnings from what's been reported on Wall Street, can you give some sort of assessment as to the health of American business from what's being disclosed for Wall Street investors?
I think it's at the end of 2019, the fourth quarter earnings that we've seen so far are a very, very mixed bag. It depends on what sector you're looking at. It looks like some of the strongest growing sectors in the United States, in particular the technology companies, didn't do so well. So we've seen some mixed earnings reports from companies like Google or their parent company Alphabet and Apple and all of these companies that have been driving economic growth in the S&P 500 index, for example, over the last several years. Twitter, all these types of technology companies are not doing as well. There are problems with user growth, how much money they're spending to deal with some of the issues that we've talked about ad nauseum in news. over the last year. So those technology companies that account for a very large chunk of the S&P 500 have reported very mixed earnings in the last quarter. Other companies, it depends. You look at retail companies. Some companies like Walmart obviously beat earnings expectations in terms of how much their sales were in the fourth quarter, and some of that might be a timing issue from when some of those food stamps and those types of programs went out ahead of the government shutdown, and so it'll be interesting to see how that played out over the rest of the year. But looking forward, some retail companies are doing well, some are not. You look at companies like Ford and Caterpillar and all of these people, they're complaining about tariffs and the cost of those tariffs on their businesses. So that piece is mixed as well. But going forward, 2019, I think if you kind of read the tea leaves and what these analyst expectations are from these earnings reports, you'll see that 2019, everybody is expecting a slower 2019 than we had in 2018. For several reasons. I think there's a global economic slowdown in the sense that most economies around the world, industrialized and non-industrialized, are sort of entering the slower growth cycle. And here in the United States, the effect of that tax cut stimulus that happened through 2018 essentially fades in 2019 and 2020, so we're expecting slower growth. Last year we'll probably average about 3% growth on a year-over-year basis in 2018. Most expectations are about 2.5% GDP growth in 2019, so slower than we were last year, about on par with where we were in 2017. So no recession yet. Reading the tea leaves, assuming that this trade deal with China gets settled, but a much slower growth than we had in 2018.
You'll find us at the end of a lot of long country roads, covering over 60% of the great state of Arkansas. Our 17 electric distribution cooperatives are working day and night to provide reliable, affordable power to over 500,000 homes, farms, and businesses, just like yours. The Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas, your local energy partners.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.